Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Punching Left. I am AJ Wilms, joined here with my wonderful co-host, Mike Lauber. And Mike, why don't you start us off, as always, with the first story of the day?
Oh, we've got a full plate of craziness today. We're going to start with this. We've now got votives to Saint Zaleski.
Wow, would you look at that? So this is like those Catholic candles of Jesus, and that looks like Zelensky superimposed onto Jesus's face.
Yeah, like I saw this a few days ago. I thought this was a joke, like this is a meme somebody put together, but no, these are real. Like you can buy these.
Wow, that's incredible, and he's wearing, of course, the Ukrainian flag around him like a robe. That's fascinating. I'm very interested in seeing the amount of nationalism that the left has and the amount of religiosity that they're beginning to have as well.
Yeah, as long as it's not American nationalism, I guess it's okay.
Right.
So my real question is like, if you burn one of these in your house, is it gonna get like struck by lightning like that George Floyd mural?
Yeah, that was so funny. I mean, let's hope so. And I tweeted a photo of this out, or I tweeted this photo out, and I was like, I don't ever want to hear the left making fun of religious people again, because this is like new levels of absurd. They're of course taking from God and stealing from him, which they often do, but now in just like the most blatant and insulting way. And they're like literally treating Zelensky as a god, as Jesus Christ. It's insane.
Yeah, like he's the patron saint of war, I suppose. Uh, or no,
Of
patron.
arming women and children. You know, like when Jesus was giving Kalashnikovs to like kids, and he was like, whichever one of you lets these little ones walk around without an AK-47 will surely be damned to hell.
That's right. He's the patron saint of money laundering. That's probably exactly what it is.
Yeah, well, Nancy Pelosi was just out in Ukraine. What was it, 2 days ago now?
Yeah,
And
over
she
the
was
weekend.
talking with them. Yeah, so she took a weekend trip over there. Very interesting. I wonder why she was there. I wonder what she was talking about with him.
She probably brought like one of her son with her. Is interviewing for a new job over there on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. They probably, they probably lost some board members during this whole war.
Yeah, you know what? Probably, and that's the unfortunate part is that our politicians are really just sold to the highest bidder in most of these cases, and now it seems like Ukraine is that person.
Yeah, actually, she may have been over there like talking to him, trying to get him to step down the war, maybe just surrender to Russia. She's probably running out of that expensive $10 quart ice cream in her freezer.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine, but I'm surprised it's going on as long as it has. What's next on the list, though? I think we have an interesting story here
Uh,
from yesterday.
So, first of all, I misspoke on the show we did yesterday. The article I saw with the headline, 20 reasons that returning to work in an office or asking someone to work in an office is racist. I use a lot of news aggregators to get our stories from, and it was actually a link to 10 different articles. So I have headlines from some of those.
Whoa!
Yes.
So we have 10 articles explaining why it's racist to be in a workplace.
Yes, racist, sexist, or I think one of these was even like it stokes trans fears. We'll go through these. And I
Okay,
mean,
let's go.
they're mostly what you'd expect from people committing microaggressions to just exposing women to men in the workplace, which is obviously a bad thing.
Whoa. Well, hey, I mean, if women want to stay home and not be in the workplace, I mean, hey, that works for me. I mean, it's funny how like sometimes the arguments go like full circle. Like I remember I was listening to this debate with Vosh, this like overweight Marxist YouTuber, and he was debating
Yeah.
this guy, and he was like, and Vosh was like, affirmative action actually helps white women the most, and I'm like, so we don't want women in the workforce. We want women in the homes. Like, yeah, we've come full circle. I'm still against affirmative action, bro. I don't know what your point is here.
Yeah, well, half the time these guys' articles don't make sense anyway, or they're based on some. Oh, what's a good way to put it? They like looking at just such a small subset of a problem and then coming up with an argument that way. It's just like everything else. They want laws for the exception, not for the rule.
Right,
Um,
of course.
but yeah, it's whatever's convenient to say at the time. There's no consistency. Um, so yeah, we can learn about what the pandemic taught us about racism and work and how to handle going back to the office. Uh, In-person work, they say, is not better for inclusion. I guess having to be around like trans people
Well,
makes you know.
that's what the article said the other day is that like if we go back to work, I mean that's the one right beside it actually, the one in with the black background or the gray
Yeah,
background. It says that if we allow people to go back to work, at least in Apple's offices, they'll become younger, whiter, and more male dominated. So for whatever reason, I guess like the people who show up to work the most are young white men. So we can't have that. So we need to stay online, keep the work online. And it's interesting because you would think that these lazy people who don't want to go to work, because that's really what this is, all these employees saying we can't go back to work, it's really probably just laziness, right? They want to be able to play like Fortnite while they're supposed to be at work, or be on Facebook instead of doing work. They can't do that in the workplace because they'd get caught.
yeah.
So I think these people are lazy. They're just trying to find excuses. But it's like, why aren't you saying there's a global pandemic and it's not safe? Instead, they're like, oh, we can't go back to work because it's going to be too white there. It's going to be too male there. It's going to be too young there.
Well, yeah, I know you hit the nail right on the head. In reality, what it is people want to sit at home in their underwear eating Hot Pockets for 4 days without taking a shower, and they can't do that if they have to go to the office.
Yeah, exactly. What
Yeah.
else? What are some of the other reasons here?
Oh, we have one of them linked to a Time columnist announces free speech as a white man's obsession. I don't know how this was linked to the work articles, but I included it anyway. I guess that could have been somebody's mistake. But returning to the office, some women of color aren't ready. So as usual, women and minorities hardest hit, especially when you are a woman minority.
Whoa.
Um, People of color are are anxious about racist microaggressions when they return to the office.
Is that even real? Like, I don't know. I've worked with a lot of people of color in the past. You know, I used to do a lot of wagey work, a lot of 9 to 5 work, and I've never met like a black person who's like, "Oh, my microaggressions." It doesn't seem to be like a legitimate thing.
No, basically, it's people that like have their you know their artificial anxiety is up so high they're just looking for something to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think this is the article that I read through that had, a lot of this is like a showing up on time is a is white supremacy. It was all those kind of usual things that you see in this stuff. Just having a heart a work ethic, that's a form of white supremacy. So it's all these false not false narratives, but
Just
false
made up
ideas.
stuff.
Yeah, basically, it's you don't want to deal with there being a schedule or having deadlines, so you just call that white supremacy.
Yeah, exactly. And this happens constantly in the US, unfortunately, where everything that people don't like is white supremacy and white nationalism. And, you can tell the common denominator among all these articles, and probably why the one over on the far left there was included, is because all of them are bashing people for being white. It's like, you're white, so you're not allowed in the workplace. You're white, so we can't have, you come back to the workforce because then there's going to be too many white people. And like that's the common denominator here is this hatred for white people, unfortunately.
Yeah, hatred for white people and like overprotection for women,
And
any type of
minorities.
minority, trans, whatever. Like one of these articles, it's not one of the ones I included, was sexual assault incidents for women are going to go up if they have to go back to the office. Um, which again, like I don't buy this to begin with, but you're
Yeah.
operating from a false premise. You can just print whatever you want. And there are no repercussions. Nobody ever checks this stuff. I mean, we laugh at it, make fun of it, but there's not going to be any like real result.
Right.
Um,
Well, this was is there any more or is this all that there is?
this was kind of the good ones. I grabbed 6 of them, and
Oh geez. Yeah, I can't imagine there's a lot to choose from with these articles. There's not a lot of high quality articles to talk about when they're all just basically the same thing.
yeah, and like I said, these did kind of go back and cover a couple of months worth of articles. It wasn't literally stuff that all printed over the weekend. Uh, I was kind of hoping to be able to say this must be the new narrative they're pushing, but because these were out over a couple months, I don't know if that's the case. Somebody just noticed this and put them all together.
Wow. Well, I mean, like I said, common denominator seems to be anti-white, anti-male, and it's just like, how much longer do we have to live with all these ridiculous notions that are, all over press, all over media, in academia as well? It's infecting the workplace now. It's shameful.
Yeah, and it's the same news we've seen for months, but I think this is having an effect. Move on to our next story here. This was I just wanted to grab the headline. This is from Spin Quark. Again, I use a lot of news aggregators to get the headlines that we talk about or the articles that we talk about. So they're pointing out, CNN, Democrats are losing black voters, Hispanics, Asian, the youth, independent and suburban voters. And then as Gallup polls showing, Democrats have lost more voters in 1 year than all 30 years of Gallup polling, meaning this is the worst year for Democrats in the last
Whoa.
30 years. So, I think it is. It's not just the economy; it's these other social issues too. It's things like this, constantly bashing, white straight men. It's all the other, allowing all the trans rights issues or grooming issues, really what we ought to call it. Uh,
Right.
but it's all this. It's all starting to add up when you factor that with the state the economy's in, with prices going up, where inflation on paper is close to 20%, and in reality, it's much higher than that when you go to the grocery store and the cost of meat's doubled.
Wow. Yeah, I know. Well, it's not only, like you said, the economic issues, which I do think actually are playing a larger role than some people may think, because the reality is that if you're going to have any like populist movement in America, it has to be centered to some extent around economics, because that's kind of the only common denominator that the middle class shares at this point. We're so multicultural, so multiracial, so multi-ethnic that we have so many different histories, heritages, backgrounds, lifestyles that one of the only things that can really unify people among around a common cause at this point in the U.S. is these economic issues like, hey, we're all getting screwed over by this, like, you know, ruling class. They all eat these luscious meals every day, and meanwhile, like, we can't afford to buy fruit anymore. We can't afford to buy meat anymore. Like, what kind of a world are we living in? We can't even afford to eat like meat when that's a luxury now. It's ridiculous, and people are going to start unifying around this. And like you said, also, it's the social issues that are just taking things to a whole new low, like drag queen story hour. I mean, what kind of people, like, who would be on board with that? I don't know of any, like, Hispanic or black or, you know, Asian families or white families who would look at drag queen story hour and be like, oh, that's aw-. Unfortunately, actually, I probably do know some white families who'd be on board with drag queen story hour. But for the most part, you know, especially with minority voters, it's like you look at that and it's disgusting. Now, whether or not they're actually going to go to the polls and vote, whether they connect that to Democrats, whether, you know, this, that, or the other, totally other thing. But at least some of them are recognizing that this is a result of liberalism. This is a result of the left. And these leftists, I don't know why they think the drag queen story hour, open borders, and abortion till birth are good policies to run on, because they're certainly not. Although maybe I shouldn't speak too soon, because the Dems do control the House right now, right? And the presidency. Well,
yeah. Well, I think a lot of that is
that, but
yeah. There's definitely some shenanigans that went on there. That's a whole other story that is not good for YouTube. But I think the bottom line is people vote with their wallets. So when all of a sudden your policies are having a direct effect on what they can get at the grocery store, what gas costs them, and they see the implementation from the Biden regime constantly being things, whether it's cutting gas production, this push towards green energy, or other policies that are affecting farmers in negative ways, like people see this, and when it's a continuous stream of it, not a single issue, it's much harder for the left to escape that and escape the criticism. And
right.
you compound social issues on top of that. Again, drag queen story hour.
Yep.
I don't know too many people that are in favor of that, and most, especially families I know, are diametrically opposed to it. They want nothing to do with that. And again, when it keeps happening, it's not just, oh yeah, look at that insane person within the regime that keeps pushing this. When it's everybody, or when it's Resident Biden, then they walk away from that. So even if they were Democrats, they start looking at alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. And right now, it seems like the only alternative is the Republican Party. And I hope that they do take more firm stances against these things, and they follow in the lead of DeSantis and some of these other leaders. I think, like, where is it? Kansas or Oklahoma. They're taking some very direct measures against abortion, and you know, trying to pass some very, what some people call radical laws. I think they're very reasonable, though. And we need to have these kind of hardline approaches when it comes to dealing with these issues, because I mean, the left is literally trying to turn your kid into a drag queen. They're literally trying to give your daughter an abortion. I mean, this is, if there is any time to fight back, it should be right now. So we need to understand that we need to be putting up a good enough fight to appeal to people. We can't just be the party of like, oh, well, we're kind of just like against that, but we're not going to do anything about it, and live and let live, and as long as you don't bug me. That approach is not working with the American people anymore.
No. And DeSantis, I just saw he has 61% approval across all voters in Florida right now, which is insane,
Wow.
which means he's winning a percentage of the Democrats. I mean, first of all, the candidate they're running against him, I mean, she's a nutbag, but I don't know how she got their party nomination to begin with. But even they're starting to walk away from her, and when they see these policies, and once DeSantis gets a chance to explain himself, it's reasonable. It's stuff that people will get behind.
Right.
And we do need more governors like that. I think there are some good people coming into the equation through this next election cycle. If they're not screwed over by the Republican Party, that we could really have some good people there. Because like Candace Taylor in Georgia, she's running for governor there. The party is basically lined up against her and is trying to keep her from getting into debates and other things. But she's a great candidate. She understands, too, that sometimes, like fighting against the Fed right now, they're going to threaten to withhold funds from the state. She's like, well, fine, you know, withhold the money. We'll take care of it ourselves. That's better than having to deal with all these strings that are attached for these ridiculous policies. Tim Ramthun up in, or I think I'm mispronouncing his last name. I think it's Ramthun up in Wisconsin. He's another one, same thing. And if we get more people in office that are actually willing to fight back, that's what will make things change.
Yeah, we need to be willing to fight back. People respect strength, and this is why I think that even DeSantis, who you wouldn't think would be able to capture any of this like moderate vote because he's taking these very hardline stances on these political issues, he's actually capturing more votes now than he ever has before because people respect strong leaders and people who can produce positive results. And everything that DeSantis is doing as of lately is quite positive for families in Florida and for the right wing in general. And because of this, obviously people notice this and respect him, and they're going to want to support him, and they're going to be more energized to support him as well.
Yes. And people have to remember too, just because the media portrays DeSantis like he's, Hitler reincarnate, um, that that doesn't mean that's how the average person is going to interpret it. Once he says,
Right.
this isn't, you can't say gay in the classroom. This is just, we don't want sex ed taught to kids that are 8 and younger.
Right.
Once that's explained, moderates are like, well, yeah, that sounds reasonable. I don't want that either. Maybe
Right.
I'm a Republican.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I think we've grown it's not even really the Republican movement. It's more the populist right movement has grown exponentially because of CRT and all these other things that the left is doing that's forced people to activate and wake up.
Yeah, well, that's how most people become right wing. That's how most people became Trump supporters and reactionaries and populists and nationalists, as they saw that the left is just taking things so far. I think for the most part, people just generally want to be left alone. And we kind of have this like default kind of libertarian mindset of like, okay, just let me do my thing. You do your thing. I'll do my thing. Just leave me alone, especially when it comes to the government and to politics. But we've seen that the left is just ruthless with their assault on the American people and on families and on church in America, that they just will not leave us alone. They will continually and nonstop come after us until we're destroyed, frankly. So we recognize now that there is a war going on between the Democrats and the Republicans, or the left and the right, or globalists and nationalists, however you want to frame it. There is this battle going on between these factions, and it will lead to the destruction of one of two parties. And we don't want to be the libertarians saying, okay, we're just going to be individuals and we're just going to mind our own business and we're not going to bug you guys. Meanwhile, they're like, okay, we're going to collectivize, we're going to organize, we're going to get together, and we're going to destroy those guys. Like, there needs to be an equal and opposite reaction going on here. We need to be able to fight with just as much force as they're exerting onto us.
Exactly. And I think the last couple of years, the left has been able to steamroll a lot of things on the right because, well, one, their policy positions didn't get to the point where they were absolutely insane until probably the last like 10 years. I mean, some of them were like an abortion and other things, but now it's blatant. It's out in the open. Nobody's trying to hide anything anymore. It isn't just, we want to protect women's rights, which is the way that you can frame it before. Now they're actually passing bills to, for infanticide for up to a month
Right.
after a kid's born, and nobody is going to get behind that, like nobody in their right mind. And that's why the victories for our side are starting to pile up, whether it's free speech or a lot of these other social issues. People are willing to push back, which means we're going to start winning.
Right. Well, that's like the case with abortion. Like you kind of said, it started with like safe, legal, and rare, and then it moved into abortion on demand until birth. And it's crazy, honestly, since Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, it has been established that you can get an abortion up until birth so long as you have a reasonable health concern. If the mother's health is at risk, and this was expanded in Doe versus Bolton, not to get too into the weeds into this, but basically, health was defined as mental health, physical health, emotional health, financial health. So all you have to say is, I don't feel like I'm ready to raise my baby. That is a legitimate health concern. So when Democrats and Republicans say there's going to be an exception for the health of the mother with abortion, abortion will be illegal except if the mother's health is at risk. No, it's the mother's life at risk. That's like the caveat that's acceptable. The mother's health at risk, that has legally been defined as emotional health, financial health, social health. My friends will judge me. My community will judge me. I'm not ready to have a baby yet. My financial health is at risk. I won't be able to afford to raise the baby. It's going to hurt my wallet. All of those are like legitimate excuses to be able to have an abortion up until the 3rd trimester in any state. So it started with safe, legal, rare. But in reality, what it was the whole time was abortion up until birth. But now Democrats are just proclaiming this and screaming it from the rooftops.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what terrifies the left so much about the Oklahoma law right now, is because it is wrapped up that way, where it's life, not health, for the exception, and they are going to have to fight it through courts. So we'll see what happens there. I did see another story that, unfortunately, the reason I didn't link it is because they had no sourced information or anything else. It was kind of to me, it read like an opinion piece. But I've heard this other places now, where there are several states now that they're getting down to where most of their abortion clinics are closing or forced to be closed because they just don't have the money coming in to keep their doors open.
Nice.
That's it's the effect of both the laws and the shift in what the public wants, that there's less women in a lot of these areas now going to these clinics, which means they don't have the money to keep their doors open. So
That's
it's
interesting. I wonder if they're going to be like appealing to the feds for financial assistance or anything like that, because I know that there are financial programs available for some of these abortion clinics. I know Planned Parenthood receives some federal funding, and they say, oh, it doesn't go to abortions, but it's like it goes to Planned Parenthood Corporation, though. Like, again, for those of you who don't know, Planned Parenthood will often say, oh, only like 1% of our procedures that we do are for abortions or actual abortions, right? Well, in reality, it's like they give out hundreds of thousands of abortions, and that's the primary practice they do. But what you have to do before you get an abortion is you have to like take a pregnancy test, and that's counted as a procedure, just like abortion's counted as one. And then you have to do an ultrasound, and that's counted as one. And then you have to do another thing and another thing and another thing. So basically, the federal government is paying for the entire process of getting an abortion. They're just not paying for like the actual procedure where they actually rip apart the limbs of the baby. But to me, it's like, this is a baby killing factory. I don't even want to keep the lights on with my tax dollars. Where does the federal government get off using any of my money to fund anything in this building at all?
Well, that's really the bottom line is no matter what, if you're giving an organization money to pay the bills, it can go to whatever you say it is. So like, let's say the money that we're going to give them is just for utilities and building expenses. It doesn't matter because that still offsets a huge block of cash that then they can shift into whatever they want.
Exactly.
It can be offsetting payroll, and if that's several $1,000,000, it still helps them expand to other things they want, because what's there to stop them? If you've paid 100% of this bill, that means none of the profits have to go to pay that.
Exactly. And it's ridiculous. I mean, could you imagine if like I don't know, there's so many examples that you could bring up where it's so ridiculous, where the left would not obviously support money. Imagine like churches, right? Churches getting public tax dollars to stay open, and we're like, oh, well, the money doesn't go towards paying the pastor when he does the anti-LGBT sermon. It just goes to the pastor for all the other sermons that are like, love everybody and obey your parents and yada yada yada. That's what the tax dollars going. It's like, obviously that's not the case. The tax money just goes to the church. It just goes to Planned Parenthood in this case, in real life, and it just gets spent however, right? And we shouldn't even have to pay to keep the lights on. We shouldn't have to pay for like the disposable bags that they throw the babies into. We shouldn't have to pay the drivers who drive the baby parts into like the waste facility. I mean, all of it is immoral. We shouldn't have to pay for a single penny of any of it. It's a terrible place.
Exactly. Um, and I think, well, the left obviously hates churches. This is a case, our next story here, where they didn't even want one to have a religious flag in front of the Capitol building or in front of a building in Boston. But again, we had a Supreme Court victory, and of all things, it was actually a 9-0 in favor of free speech and religious rights. So this was, again, just last week, but and the momentum is on our side, and it is in a lot of ways right now. I think the left has taken just blow after blow after blow. So they're getting ready to gear up for an offensive again, I think, through summer and through election season. We just saw them install this Ministry of Truth, or Disinformation Board, and they're going to push back to regulate the tech industry again, focusing on social media. So get ready for them to go on the offensive, because we've had a lot of victories in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. And with this case, I mean, it's ridiculous that it even had to be brought to the court at all, because it was like the city was flying a flag. There's flying many flags, and one of them was a Christian flag, right? Just a flag with a cross on it. And this apparently offended people, and they're like, you can't do that. And everyone is freaking out over this. The ADL was posting about this on Twitter, and I replied to them, and I basically said, look, America's a Christian nation. We should be able to promote Christian values, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the religious demographics of our nation, and then respecting them and even promoting them in some cases, right? Yeah. How ridiculous would it be if, like, in Saudi Arabia, they were like, you can't promote Islam here. What? It's a Muslim country, though. Oh, but we're using tax dollars. What, tax dollars for like a flagpole? It was already there. There's no upkeep. It's not like the Planned Parenthood thing where you're constantly giving money every year to supply abortions. It's like there's a flagpole, and some dude like hoisted up a flag that he probably bought himself. Like what's the conflict here? And it really is an anti-Christian thing. It has nothing to do with separation of church and state. The church is not influencing government because there's a flag flying, right? It's ridiculous.
I mean, I think you touched on several different things there. So first of all, like, this whole separation of church and state does not actually appear in our Constitution anywhere. That's a myth. It's from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote, where he's actually, in a lot of ways, arguing the opposite. He's arguing that no, there can't be a federal religion, but there could be a state religion. And actually, ironically, Maryland, I wonder if they are still technically a Catholic state, or if that was ever removed out of their Constitution, because originally they were a Catholic state. You know, the land of Mary, Maryland. Yeah.
Huh.
Well, several of our colonies were originally religious colonies. I know some of them have since altered the constitutions, but I wonder if it's actually left in there and just not enforced. Kind of like France is still technically a Catholic nation.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is like, here's a hot take too, and maybe there's a lot of conservatives who wouldn't agree with me, but okay, let's just say the founding fathers weren't Christians. Let's just say, and many of them were not. They were like these kind of deists or whatever. They believed in God, but not the Christian God. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so they weren't Christian and they didn't want to promote Christianity in the government. Well, so what? Like, we can still promote Christianity today. It's a morally good thing to promote good values, and I would much rather 100% of the time promote Christianity over atheism, atheistic value. You guys want to look like China? You want to look like North Korea? I don't want state atheism. You want to look like the USSR? Like Venezuela? No, I want to look like a Christian nation. So we should promote Christian values. Do you want to look like Saudi Arabia? Do you want to look like Iran? I don't want to promote Muslim values. Some religions are better than others. Hate to break it to you guys. And Christianity seems to be a pretty gosh darn good religion to promote the values of. So even if the founding fathers, like, I don't worship the founding fathers, I worship God. If the founding fathers say something and God says something else, I'm going to go with what God says. And I am 100% behind promoting the values of God first, even if that means contradicting the founding fathers, which in reality, as Mike just explained, there isn't even really a contradiction there at all.
No. Well, the other thing is people conflate freedom of religion and freedom from religion. You know, it doesn't say anywhere that our government is like obligated to make sure that if unless you choose to, you never run into any religious references anywhere in your life. That it being part of our law and part of our moral structure that our country is founded on, I mean, the two are intertwined. So there is no way to completely separate church and state in the way that some of these atheists want it to be.
Right, and people don't understand what church and state are really mean, right? I mean, atheists think this means when Christians are in government or something, and it's like, that's obviously not the case. Or they think, oh, when churches get like a tax break, they'll say that's not separation of church and state. That has nothing to do with it. You know what that really means, and this is even coming from like a Christian perspective. Church has a specific role and the government has a specific role, and to put them together can cause problems because the motives and the role of the church are going to be different than the motives and the intentions of a government. And they probably should be different because they do have different roles. But that's not to say they need to be hostile towards each other. That doesn't mean they can't work together. That doesn't mean that there can't be mutually beneficial agreements where it's like, hey, the church is really good for the moral, well-being of the people. Let's promote that. Let's use tax dollars to promote that. In fact, the founding fathers, I had a debate with an atheist at CPAC because there was an atheist table at CPAC, of course, CPAC of all places. They invite an Atheist for Liberty table to come, and I'm debating there was actually a handful of atheists I was debating at once, but I told them, I'm like, look, you guys say that the founding fathers wanted separation of church and state. You said that, they would never agree with giving churches tax breaks and things like this. First of all, they probably wouldn't want churches or anyone else taxed right off the bat. But second of all, you can actually look at Jefferson. I believe it was Jefferson, or was it Edison, who wrote a different version of the Bible. Are you familiar with this?
I
was
believe
it the
that was
Edison
Jefferson.
version or the Jefferson version?
I believe it was Jefferson.
And essentially what they did is they made a very compact version of the Bible that was easier to understand for the Native Americans. And what they did is they used public money to fund this operation, and then they used public tax dollars to print out these Bibles, and then they used public tax dollars to distribute these Bibles to the native people because they wanted to assimilate them. Atheists will say, oh, the founding fathers destroyed the Bible, they clipped it up or whatever. Now, you can have your own opinion on whether or not we should be changing the Bible, right? But what the intention was let's make it easier to understand for this new population so that they can assimilate, and let's use tax dollars to make them Christian. So the founding fathers themselves were using tax dollars to convert people to Christianity. This is the reality of what our country used to look like. So people don't even understand church and state. Atheists don't even understand the history of our nation and what our founding fathers did. Even if they themselves were not Christians, they understood the importance of keeping the religious demographics of this nation.
Correct. Yeah, what our founding fathers wanted to avoid was things that had gone on in Europe in the past, and that was the church's direct involvement in government, or wielding their power to basically just to bring money to the church, especially with the Catholic system with the bishops and everything else, where they would crown the emperors and kings and everything else, and gave the government legitimacy. They didn't want that relationship intertwined again, where the religion was used as a tool to control people.
Right. And that's what I mean about, like, there's two different roles, right? Like, the government should be looking out for the physical well-being of the people, whereas the church needs to look out for the spiritual well-being. So if you start making these two different institutions with two different roles into one, you can't have like an institution doing both at the same time. You may as well split them up and have the church focus on the spiritual well-being, government focusing on the physical well-being. And like I said, there can be overlap and they can help each other. Another reason that Christians may not want to be in support of church and state being like one and the same is because in Russia, this is how it was. And when the Bolsheviks rose to power, they wanted to take over the government. Well, guess what that meant? They had to kill everyone in the church as well. Now, the Bolsheviks were these disgusting commies who probably would have killed all the Christians anyways, so maybe it doesn't matter in that case. But the concept of when church and state are together, what does that mean? If you want to take over the country, you have to take over the church too. It's a necessity, right? So again, that's maybe another reason why it would maybe be beneficial for Christians to not be like literally the government. Like, it should be two different things. Christians in the church, Christians in the government. That's great. I support that. Church and state being one and the same. There's some reasons, even as Christians, we might not want that to happen, but it's for none of the reasons why these atheists say. The atheist arguments are all just anti-Christian, and it's because they hate us.
Exactly. Like, you don't want your government enforcing religious practices, but you do want them to have a religious and moral foundation. You want them to understand where we came from, what brought us here. You don't want the government demanding, creating laws where every Sunday you can't drive or buy a beer or whatever. That's where they saw the line. They don't want specific religious practices being implemented into our laws. They want people to be free, and same thing. Like, I don't care what religion somebody wants to practice, as long as it's not hurting me or hurting anyone else. They should be free to do what they want. That means they lock themselves in their house every Sunday and don't come outside, or whatever crazy thing they want to believe. They should be free to do that.
Right, and something I've always said is that we need to respect the founding demographics of this nation, including the religious demographics, right? And because of that, we should not say it's illegal to be Muslim, but what we should say is, like, you cannot be like a Muslim president or something like that. You can't be Muslim in Congress, because that is when you are taking a foreign religion that is foreign to our people, and now it is influencing our government. Now, if you want to be Muslim in your household, absolutely fine. It's not going to be illegal to practice other religions, but we should, in the same way that, like, you can't be, in fact, in other countries like Saudi Arabia, I think it's illegal just to be Christian, or in like Iran or many of these other Islamic nations. They certainly don't let you become president or a congressman or a senator as a Christian, because they understand, look, this is a Muslim country. We want to preserve the Muslim demographics. We want to preserve the Muslim influence. We do not want Christian or Jewish or Confucius or Buddhist or atheist influence in our country. And I think they have a right as a group of people to get together and say, we want to protect our people from foreign influences, whether that's religious or political or otherwise. Therefore, we're going to set some standards. And in America, we do the same with citizenship. We say you have to be a citizen because we don't want foreign influence in our government. Well, we can expand that and say, oh, and by the way, we also don't want foreign religious influence in our country. You have to be Christian to run, maybe.
Yeah, and in a lot of, like, if I understand this correctly, I may have this a little off, but like in Iran, like, you can technically be there and be a Christian, but you pay additional taxes. They take a huge chunk of your income. It's also limited. Yeah, it's also limited how much you can make by the government, or what jobs or what roles you can be in. And then those rights can be revoked, and you can be jailed and thrown in basically any time.
Right, and it's interesting because even in like America, like I said, we actually do have like discriminatory practices against like non-U.S. citizens, which makes total sense. Like, we should have those. For example, in the military, I mean, you can't join most jobs in the military. You can't be an officer unless you are a U.S. citizen. So if you're a green card holder, if you're a foreign national, you're not even a green card holder. I think they're called non-resident aliens is the official word for it. If you're here on like a student visa or a work visa, you can't join the military. You can't vote. You can't do a lot of things that citizens can do. And all of this is because we don't want foreign influence within our country on a political level. And like I said, there's absolutely nothing immoral, in my opinion, about expanding this to be, well, let's prevent foreign religious influence coming into our nation and changing our culture, or foreign cultural influence even.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing, like, where this this really starts creating a problem is where people don't want to be just left alone to practice their own religion. That's when they want special rights and special privileges entered into law for them. And that's
Right.
when it starts affecting everybody else.
Yes, exactly. And this is something else I've talked about. And what I've said in the past is that there should be no special rights granted to any group. So, for example, America is a Christian country, so we should have Christian foundations for our law. And that means, for example, we're going to use the Christian definition of marriage. Now, the Islamic definition of marriage is one man and up to 4 wives. Well, in Christianity, it's one man and one woman. In the atheistic, materialistic, naturalistic, LGBT universe, it's, well, love is love. A man can marry a kid, an animal maybe. You can marry a man, a woman and a woman, one man and 10 women. Doesn't matter. Love is love. There's no standards.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't align with the Christian worldview, and America is a Christian nation. So you have to play by our rules. We're not going to, now everyone's going to have equal rights. If you're a Muslim, you're going to have a right to marry a single woman, just like a Christian man can marry a single woman. If you're gay, you can still marry a woman. It's just that you can't have a special right given to you where it's like, okay, we have the standard set, one man, one woman, that's what marriage is. But, oh, this person's Mormon, so let's let them marry more people because we need to give them religious freedom. No, their religious freedom is to believe in Mormonism. But then as far as the law is concerned, you have equal rights to us, which is you can marry one woman and that's it.
You're exactly right. And that's again, like we keep seeing the push to shift these things where you gave a good example with like the LGBT community where it's, they want to be able to marry a man and another man and another man and a cow. And
Right.
that is the direction it keeps headed.
Yep.
And speaking of the left activating again, we ought to move on to our next story here.
Yep. And I will
Antifa-
just say too, like, sorry, just very briefly, just
Yeah, go
to
ahead.
sum this up too, like, people might scoff and laugh at the idea, like, oh, like a man and an animal, oh, a man and a cow, that's ridiculous. But the thing is like at the fundamental level of this, what they're saying is the definition of marriage is indefinable. It's undefinable. Christians say it's definable because it's in the Bible, one man, one woman. It's how it's always been. It's been like that for thousands of years. And that's where our definition comes from. Even in Islam, even within Mormonism, even within these other religions, I don't believe in them. I think they're made up. I think they're satanic. But they at least have definitions for things. They have definitions for marriage. But with the LGBT, their definition is literally love is love. So whoever you love, which is a subjective feeling, whoever you love, you're allowed to be with. And that can actually like legitimately lead logically to things like pedophilia and bestiality and all sorts of things that are bad because the definition is made up as you go. It's a social construct. So that is like a legitimate argument that can be made against them.
Well, that is the danger, and it's also what we're seeing right now is where there is this push now to accept pedophilia as a like legitimate orientation. What are the MAPS, a minor attracted person?
Disgusting, isn't it? It's already happening, and
Yeah,
it's going to happen with animals in the future. I mean, people call us crazy, and I used to call the Christian people when I was like a dumb liberal. I was 15 years old. It was 2015. I used to be like, oh, that old Christian lady's saying that this is going to become like bestiality and pedophilia next. That's crazy. That bigot. And then like I grow up and I understand the world and how it works, and I get a little older and I'm like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. Like this is the trajectory it's going down when you define the definition of marriage as whatever I want it to be.
Yeah, the slippery slope fallacy has a remarkable track record of accuracy at this point. Again, we've said this several times, but 7 years ago, it was the push for gay marriage. And again, if that's where it ended, I don't think most people would care. If some guy wants to marry another guy and they just want to be happy in their house or whatever, who cares? But the problem is that's not where it ends. It's the push for more and more and more. And now this minor attracted person thing, I think that's where a lot of people draw the line. I think there and then the transgender insanity is where the average person starts drawing the line and says, this is not healthy behavior. This is not something we want to foster in our society. We have to draw the line here.
Yeah. Well, speaking of unhealthy and degenerate behavior in society, why don't we go to our next clip, which is absolutely insane as always, because this is Antifa. And do we have audio for this or no?
I stopped the audio because it's basically just people screaming.
It's just yelling and screaming. It'll blow your eardrums. It's not anything groundbreaking. But these are some patriots here participating in their democratic right of like protest or what is the, okay, can you explain the situation for the audience here, Mike? You know better than me.
Yeah, so there's 3 different videos I've got queued up here. This first one was a campaign event for a guy that's actually a minority running as a Republican. Antifa showed up. I believe this one was in Seattle, threw smoke grenades and then assaulted several people that were there for this rally. And again, the police do nothing. When this one finishes rolling, we'll go into the next one, which was I think a reporter being assaulted also in either Seattle or Portland. And the third one, same thing. It was a family event, and Antifa shows up to, hurt people and force them out of there, prevent them from having.
It's crazy.
And
they have to use violence, of course. They're one of the most violent groups in America, and we discussed this just yesterday, actually. That what were we talking about? Like the biggest terrorists in America, right? It's not right-wing extremists, it's not white supremacists or white nationalists or neo-Nazis who are committing all these terrorist attacks and violence for political reasons. There's essentially zero political violence on the right, like legitimately zero political violence coming from the right wing. If there ever is any violence, I guarantee you it's in self-defense because the left-wingers are attacking them. Even situations as contentious as things like Charlottesville, we saw that was kind of like the hallmark. Whoa, the right-wingers are violent. See how bad it is? And you had a lot of like mainstream conservatives throwing those people under the bus. When you actually watch the videos, you see that it's Antifa who shows up at their event and starts attacking them. And then they defend themselves, or they're like attacking people in their cars. They have guns and they're pointing guns at people. Antifa is. So these right-wingers are like driving and like trying to get out of this situation. They're running away. They're fighting back. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If Antifa just didn't show up to try to hurt people, then none of that violence would have happened. And it happens like that every single time. You see that even with that last clip we had on screen. There's these nice old people, these younger people, they're all together, they're conservatives. They're practicing their right of freedom of mobility, and they're just out there protesting, engaging in politics. But then Antifa shows up to crash the party, and they come to hurt people. And if any of those conservatives defended themselves, they would be labeled a terrorist. But in reality, Antifa, BLM, these are the only terrorist groups that exist in America, at least in any legitimate way.
Yeah, and that's the story we missed over the weekend is, or that I should have included here, was the Freedom Truckers, the Canadians were going back up for a rally, and Antifa assaulted them as they were crossing the U.S. border. And then there was another video of an assault too of Antifa over the weekend. I know. Well, again, it's something that's spreading, but the problem is, like, government, there's not equal enforcement. These people will literally show up. You have a right to assemble, like they want to have, and when it's them, they want to be able to exercise it. But if our side tries to have a family event or a church event, they show up and they try to break it up and hurt people.
Yeah, literally, like church events. There's been church events where Antifa shows up and tries to attack people, and I commend the people at the church. Some of them were like trying to defend their families and like these, because there's kids there, there's women there, there's elderly people there, and luckily you had a few guys who were like, hey, stay back, like don't attack my family members. This is my wife and my children. Stop trying to hurt them. And it's insane how they're able to get away with this, Antifa, every single time. And it's because they have the backing. They think they're this like communist anarchist group, that they're fighting against the system. They're funded by the system. The system loves them. Oh, but we destroyed the Democrats' HQ in Portland. They don't care. You think George Soros cares? Dude, he loves that. He wants destability, instability, and a destabilized America. That's awesome for these mega corporations.
Well, exactly, and it's political terrorism, whether they're blowing up or destroying a Democrat HQ or just yelling at people through their megaphones. They march through a neighborhood. It's the same net effect. I mean, think about it. This is the same areas that defunded police and everything else that catered to the demands that these lunatics are making. They're all now worse off for it. Minneapolis is turning into a war zone. And they're still going to defund their police. I keep hearing stories with Portland. The quality of life's gone down. You've seen the videos of homeless people and these encampments that pop up everywhere.
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot. In fact, we should bring those up on the show on our next show, because there's so many homeless in encampments, and there's so many people addicted to drugs. There's a huge drug problem in these major cities. And we just sent something like, how much was it, another $34 million or $1 billion or something crazy like that to Ukraine. Meanwhile, our streets are infested with drugs. We have the bubonic plague coming back to places like San Francisco, and our government's doing absolutely nothing to protect American citizens. Meanwhile, the representative of San Francisco, where the bubonic plague has come back to because of how dirty and disgusting it is there, she's currently in the Ukraine trying to lobby for the U.S. to send more money to them.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to extend her money laundering operation and 10% for the big guy. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there was a great, really depressing, but great video I saw. I think it was Philadelphia, where it was just somebody walking through the streets with a camera. I think I saw this Saturday, and they were just all the drug use, the needles, the people with what are they calling it now? The fentanyl shakes.
Wow.
I mean, it's disgusting. I saw
Yeah.
another one a few
Is
days
that what it
ago.
is when the people are shaking? That's like a fentanyl. They're coming down from a over like a high or something.
Yeah, it can be fentanyl, heroin,
Withdrawals.
yeah, withdrawals from one of several drugs. But
Wow.
the fact of the matter is now, especially in these cities where they install these so-called shooting galleries, safe places for people to go use drugs, and
It's
safe injection
crazy.
sites. Well, of course, you have users congregate there, which then you have dealers come to congregate there, which means then you have crime go up all around
Yeah.
there because people need money for these drugs. And then the left is like, well, what happened? This just used to be such a beautiful part of town.
Yeah, I know. And then they're like, I guess we just needed to pay higher taxes and that would have solved the problem the whole time, right? I guess we just need more diversity, you know? And it's like these people are treasonous. Like there's the stupid libs who like vote for this, but they're like literally mentally ill. Like they're brain damaged. Like we can't really hold them accountable because they would like just plead insanity or like their mental age is like 5 years old. Like we just can't hold them accountable. But these politicians who push for this and allow it to happen, the media who propagates this to these like sheep who will vote for these politicians in turn, all of these people need to be held accountable. And this is like borderline treasonous activity when you're killing our people with drugs and you're enabling it. And in fact, even promoting it when you're giving out needles and crack pipes and things like this, when you're
Yeah,
making designated zones for drug use, which, as you said, brings in drug dealers, brings in crime, brings in a whole host of new problems. It's absolutely disgusting. I absolutely despise, I hate these people who are in government. Not all of them are bad, obviously, but the ones who are pushing our people into these positions, it's absolutely disgusting.
well, and what I don't understand too is like, okay, somebody makes a bad policy that doesn't work. You try something else. You don't keep doubling down and adding in more
Right.
safe injection sites or expanding these programs. If it's if the idea originally was this is humanitarian, we want to see if this helps, and it didn't work, you move on to something else. You don't keep doing it.
Yeah.
Um, I laugh at a lot of these stories I read about in Portland and Seattle and other places where it's just gotten so horrible where like before a kid's soccer game, like all the parents link arms, they put on their steel-toed boots and they have to walk the field to pick up all the syringes there so none of the kids end up with you know,
It's
a needle in
crazy.
their foot while they're playing soccer. Or there was this other story in I think this was also Portland where a homeless encampment had started burrowing into the side of a hill where there was a freeway overpass and collapsing the road. I mean, again, like this is what happens when you let this just totally go out of control and the lawlessness uh, just get to the point where people are doing whatever they want.
Yeah, yeah, and it's crazy. And I mean, people need to be held accountable for this. And that's the thing is like no one is being held accountable for this. And like you said, look, if this was one idea of many that they wanted to try out, I understand that. But they continually, constantly are pushing this, and we know now that it's not for humanitarian reasons. It's not for the right reasons. They're trying to push drugs on our people to make us more subordinate. They're trying to make things more unstable in these countries, or rather these cities. Because in this country, unfortunately, we have politicians who can profit from the instability. They can say, look at
Yes,
the giant drug problem. We need more government. We need more Democrats. We need more socialism to fix these issues. And it's shameful that they are playing on our emotions. They're using us as pawns. They're using your sons and daughters as pawns, feeding them drugs, feeding them pornography, feeding them all this disgusting, degenerate stuff so that they can be more easily controlled and that can justify then further government intervention into our lives.
exactly. And I just want to point something out real quick. We've got a couple pictures of a few of their finest on the screen here, but if you paid attention during the last video, I mean, when you see these people, you know that there's something wrong with them, and it's not just
Yeah,
like the blue hair and everything else.
right.
Like a lot, they literally look like they're henchmen for some villain holding Gotham City if they don't reveal the identity of the Batman.
Yeah. Like unironically, they do. They look like some dumb comic book villains or whatever. Like it's insane. If you showed me this in like a movie, like the is that who is that Stalin's granddaughter there at
Yeah,
44
yeah.
right here? Yeah, if you showed me her and in a movie, I'd be like, guys, you guys are over exaggerating. My suspension of disbelief can't take that. Like, no one would look like that in real life. But here we are. This is like the granddaughter of Joseph Stalin, real life communist here, and this is what she looks like, of course.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the other guy is. the Antifa tank unit. This picture just started circulating over the weekend. There's a few other ones. I saw a video with this guy where some car swerving out of his way, and like, I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to hit that guy either. It'd definitely total your vehicle.
Oh yeah, I know it'd be crazy. Your car would be destroyed. It'd be gone. You could be going 80 miles an hour. Your car would disintegrate. It would just. It's like you hit 88 miles an hour and then smash into that whale there. It's kind of like Back to the Future, except instead of like teleporting to like the future or whatever, you teleport to heaven. You're gone. Your car is just disappeared.
Yeah, and a hat tip to Safe Life body armor. I didn't know they made vests that big. Is that like intended for a bear normally?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, is that a vest? Like, oh my goodness, it's stretching out. I didn't know Kevlar could stretch like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of that's a lot of Kevlar. You could probably protect a bus with that.
And of course the Antifa sticker on there too. It's shameful. I
Yeah.
love how it's like, I need a sticker, and they have like little stickers. No, I need like a bumper sticker. I'm putting it on my vest.
Yeah, I need something you decal a hood of a car with.
Yeah, exactly.
But I suppose we better move on to our next story. And again, this is a few days old, so I'm sure you've probably seen this, but world's first lesbian bishop calls for church to remove crosses and install Muslim prayer space.
Whoa. Hey, isn't it in Revelations at the end of the world, there's supposed to be like the combination of Christianity and Islam, or Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, or something like that?
Yeah, it's supposed to spring up around the Temple Mount, which, believe it or not, there's like an organization trying to accomplish that right now.
Of course. Wow, it doesn't shock me at all. It's like I made a Telegram post the other day, and I said Karl Marx literally just read Revelations and like the government system that happens in Revelations, like the political climate that there is, and he was like, let's make a political ideology based off this. Because like literally you read Revelations and it's like one world government, one world order, one economic system, no classes, and like you're gonna have the leaders and then the sheep, the cattle who serve them. And then you read about communism and you're like, holy, it's like every single point, a stateless, borderless, world with no countries, no governments, and whatever. And in reality, of course, what happens is you do have the government. It's like a ruling class, and then you have everyone else mixed together. No nationalities, no ethnic groups, no religion. It's just like a big blob of slaves, basically.
Yeah, you're literally everybody is just serfs to the government. That you have no rights or no property, no anything. You're just told what to do. They move the cogs in the machine to wherever they need them.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that is literally, it is what communism is. Anyways, not to get too far off on the end days stuff, but I mean, this is insane that you have, of course, a lesbian female bishop, and I don't know how they get to the point of bishop, by the way, either. Because is this like a Catholic, or is this like Methodist or something? Do you know what denomination this is?
I think it was Methodist. Hang on, I'll try to pull it up real quick.
Because, well, you pull that up, I'll just keep talking here. I think, there was once a time where it was a Catholic bishop, and he was on TikTok, and he's a LGBT member. I don't know if he's gay himself or whatever he is, but he's in the community, and he has a son, and he turned his son transgender. His 9-year-old kid, I think like 9 or 10 years old, or a very young child, he turned his son into a transgender girl or whatever. And I remember he was doing an Instagram or a TikTok live stream, and he was like, I commented, and I'm like, being gay is against the Bible. Like, why are you in the LGBT? And he's like, where does it say that in the Bible? And I was like, well, Paul writes a lot about it, I think, and Leviticus 18:22, a lot of Old Testament and all of church history. And then he just blocks me from his live. So then I make a video about it, a live stream, and I review like his videos. And he called the FBI on me. This guy calls the FBI on me. This bishop, this LGBTQ plus bishop who turned his son transgender. I should be calling the FBI on him for child sexual abuse. And he's calling the FBI on me for what? For what? For making fun of you on TikTok? Oh, FBI, there's a teenager on the internet making fun of me. Like, anyway, so I've had my bad experiences with bishops, and something that some people were commenting is like, how the heck does this guy get to the rank of bishop? Like, the people are saying there's no way this guy is real. There's no way he's like a part of the church, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, he confirms it in his videos. He's at his church. He's like showing the address and stuff. It's like a legitimate thing. I had my own little investigative team look into it. Legit guy, legit bishop, legit church. It's crazy. So it's very odd to me how these LGBT members are able to rise in the ranks of the churches. and get away with it. And this really underscores the fact that there is an assault on church, and it's not just like, oh, it's only affecting Catholics, or it's only affecting Protestants, or it's only affecting Orthodox or whatever, right? They are coming after all the different Christian groups. I mean, they're even going, Mormons aren't even Christian in my opinion, but like they're even going after the Mormons, right? Jehovah Witnesses are not Christians. They're going after Jehovah Witnesses too. They're even going after Muslims, right? I mean, they're going after all religious people, but specifically Christians, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, because they understand that we're the people who hold the majority of power in this country. We're the main demographics of this country. We're the ones with the most moral fortitude in this nation. So they want to attack us constantly and destroy us as individuals. They want to destroy our institution of church. They want to take everything that we love away from us and get rid of our faith entirely.
Yeah. So she is a bishop with the Church of Sweden. It doesn't say what denomination that is, if it's Methodist or whatever.
I thought Sweden was Lutheran, but Lutherans, I don't think, do they have bishops? I'm a Lutheran. I should know this. I don't know I've never met a Lutheran bishop, but.
Well, most churches also don't remove their crosses and put in Muslim prayer.
That is fair. That is very true.
So who knows what else they're not following. I just did a little bit of reading. She was the priest or a pastor, sorry, for the Siemens Mission Church in Stockholm and their dockyards. They cater to a lot of people that are there temporarily through the shipping industry. And yeah, again, and she says that they should have a welcoming message for people of all faiths, blah, 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 usual.
Yeah, that's such BS. This whole universalist thing is such garbage. Like, there is only one way to heaven, which is through Christ. It's so clear in the Bible. Like, if God himself in Christ explaining this is not enough for Christians to understand that that's actually the truth, then I don't know what will make them understand.
No. It sounds like she has faced like pushback from other people in the area too, which is good. At least somebody's trying to stand up to, again, this complete and utter nonsense.
Well, Sweden's in a really bad place in general, not only with their church, but with their immigration situation as well. And we discussed this with Jack. Fantastic episode, I believe 11 with Jack Anderson.
Yes.
He breaks down the French election. We talk about Sweden, the riots going on there, the immigration crisis. Absolutely insane. But I mean, it's sad to see a place like Sweden, which was once one of the safest places in the world, turn into what it is today. And you see this because of the government. Unfortunately, now some of these corrupt churches are trying to sponsor these activities. I've heard a lot of atheists who are right-wing or like these pagans make fun of Christians and attack us and say, you Christians keep letting in all these like third world people through your sponsorships. And I'm like, that's not me though. Like, that's not us. That's like the super liberal churches like this lady. She's the one letting in all the Muslims from, Syria and Iraq and these other countries, Afghanistan, into Sweden. Like, most right-wing conservative Christians do not want that. We just want to help our own communities.
No, maybe she just thinks they'll kill her last.
And they never do. They're always the first to go, too.
Yeah. And this kind of goes, you touch on one of my big issues with the Pope and the Catholic Church currently, because I was born and raised Catholic. But it's this idea that there shouldn't be borders, people are people, everyone has the same human rights. But the problem, again, is if you don't have language borders and cultures, you don't have a nation. If you just import everybody from the third world, you become the third world. We don't have the resources to support everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people often misunderstand, like, some of the teachings of Christianity, that we can still respect people as like children of God. And this actually almost goes back to what I was saying about like maybe there should be a separation of like church and state, because the government, of course, is going to say what's best for the country, period. Right. And that should be their job. And the church, maybe to counterbalance that or to keep them in check, or maybe it's just totally different. They say, well, what's best for like the, humanity, and what's best for God, and what's best, for more humanitarian sake. Right. And it's like, even within that realm, we need to recognize, like, yes, all people are children of God, and yes, we should be trying to help people, but we also should recognize that we can help our own community first. Like, we should help our next door neighbor before helping someone halfway around the world. We can also recognize that just letting tons of third world people into our nation doesn't actually help anything. Picking up poor people from one country and dropping them into another one isn't actually helping the world all that much. It's actually just damaging our country and our people.
Yeah, exactly. You're not giving them a new opportunity. You're not creating anything for them. You're just making them dependent on you.
Right.
And that again only takes away from our country, and it prevents us from being able to help other people that will need it in the future. But you have to focus on your own people and building up our own nation before we get to nation building around the world and trying to help everyone else. I mean, obviously, again, look at like these drug problems that are springing up and getting worse and worse and worse in all these cities and
Oh
everything
yeah.
else that's going on here,
The
until yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I didn't mean to cut you off there, but like the drug problem in America is worse than it is in Syria or Iraq. Like
Yeah.
the issues, the opioid epidemic is happening in America. It's happening in our neighborhoods. It's not happening in Ethiopia, right? Now they have their own problems, of course, and of course all these nations have their own struggles. But we also have issues that we have not even came close to addressing, and yet we think that it's better to help other people with their problems before we help our own people. The U.S. government, whose role it is to represent the U.S. citizens who live here. They're not representing us. They're representing people halfway around the globe. And it makes no sense to me because we need to be helping our own people first, especially when it comes to our government.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is too, with when our government is the one providing foreign aid, a lot of times it isn't going directly to the people. It's going to some warlord or someone else who then uses it
Yeah.
on their military or use it to their advantage. It doesn't go to the people that really need it.
Oh yeah, or it's just like a big tax write-off, scam when these companies like donate or like these charities donate
Yeah.
to places like I know people who live in Syria, who live in Iraq, who live in these Middle Eastern countries. When I was in my Arabic program in university, when I was learning the language, and something that they told me, like the people from Syria, they were like, "Look, we get shipments of food, and you know what happens? Like from UNICEF or whatever, store owners go, they take all the food, and then they sell it in their stores. And then
Yeah.
what they do is they'll like scratch off the expiration date so they can still sell it. Because guess what? When you're shipping food and it takes like 2-3 weeks, a lot of the time it's expired by the time it gets there. So it's actually like hurting the people more. The only people who benefit are these like greedy store owners who can take free food and then sell it. The actual people in Syria, though, are not benefiting at all. You know what would help the Syrian people is lifting some of the sanctions so that like they can import food themselves and feed their people.
Well, exactly. It's, when government gets involved, the problem always gets more complicated, and then more people have to line their pockets in the process. So it
Yeah.
always it compounds things. It never fixes them.
Right, and this is the thing, but everyone feels good in the process. Like, oh, I donated to UNICEF. I'm a good person. UNICEF gets their big. I mean, they get a giant paycheck for themselves, all the people on the executive board, and they don't pay any tax on their income because it's all written off when they're donating all this money away or whatever. I'm not an accountant, but I know there's a lot of tax loopholes through charities and 501c3s and so on and so forth. And then the store owners in Syria benefit, the elite in these countries benefit, the warlords in some of these countries benefit. ISIS benefits when they steal all of the supplies we send. The Taliban benefits when we send all of our supplies over there and then leave them. And you know who doesn't benefit? The only people who actually need to be helped and who we're trying to help in this process. So maybe we should just focus on helping our own people and see a direct beneficial impact instead of just sending money to faraway lands that don't even help the people we're trying to help.
Yes, no matter who wins, the children lose. Um,
Exactly.
I think we're up against we're out of time today.
Absolutely true, but we will be back here tomorrow with a special guest joining us, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll have an interview with Gabe Victal. We recorded over the weekend. You may know him from a KGB podcast and from some of the videos he's put out there at what school is it in Texas? He was out there with Jeff.
Oh, I can't remember the name, but yeah, with Jeff Younger, he was out there, and they're doing good work. So he'll be on the show tomorrow at 7:30 Eastern. So make sure you're there. And follow us on all other platforms at punchingleft.com. Follow us on Telegram, where we send out our announcements, and follow us on Instagram, where we post clips from the show. And feel free to also subscribe to us on YouTube or Odyssey. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining the stream tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any recommendations for any other topics, drop them in the chat or comments. Mike, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just thanks again, everybody. We'll see you again tomorrow night, and we'll be back again soon.
Take care.